All right, let's dive right in to Luke 14.135.
Sounds good.
This passage, it's just overflowing with these amazing stories and teachings of Jesus.
It really is.
We're going to look at the Sabbath healings.
Mhm.
We've got these banquet parables, and then even, like, what does it cost to follow Jesus?
The cost of discipleship.
Yeah, so much to cover. Let's get right into it.
Right.
So we jump in right at the beginning of Luke 14, verses 1 through 6, and we see this scene where Jesus is at a Sabbath meal at a Pharisee's house.
Yeah, can you imagine the tension?
Only no, I know.
I mean, you've got the Pharisees there watching Jesus, just waiting to catch him breaking one of their many Sabbath rules.
And they were really strict about those rules, too.
Absolutely. And to add to the drama, a man with dropsy shows up. Dropsy, by the way, is a condition that causes painful swelling, so definitely not something you want to have.
Talk about a loaded situation. It almost feels like they're waiting for something like this to happen.
It does, doesn't it?
So how does Jesus respond?
Well, instead of shying away from the controversy, he confronts it head on. He turns to the Pharisees and the experts in the law and asks them a very pointed question.
What's the question?
Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?
Oh, that's a good one.
And you know what? They refuse to answer him. Silence speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does. It really does.
So, being Jesus, he goes ahead and heals the man right there on the spot.
Of course.
But he doesn't stop there. He throws them a curveball by asking another question, a clever analogy. He says, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull it out?
Oh, I like that. I like that.
It's brilliant. It was perfectly acceptable to rescue an animal on the Sabbath. So by asking this, Jesus exposes their hypocrisy and forces them to face their own inconsistencies.
So he's saying that compassion should always come before rigid rules.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to alleviating suffering. It's a powerful message for us today, too. It makes you think, are we prioritizing rules over people in our own lives?
It really does. Are we missing opportunities for kindness and grace because we're so focused on the letter of the law? Something to think about.
It is, isn't it?
Now let's move on to verses 7-11, where we find the parable of the wedding feast. Here, Jesus observes guests vying for the best seats.
Oh, this is a good one.
It's kind of like that social media frenzy, everyone trying to get the most likes and be seen in the best light.
You could say that.
But Jesus uses this very human scenario to teach a profound lesson about humility.
Absolutely.
He tells the story about a guest who assumes the highest place, only to be embarrassed when someone more important arrives and he's told to move down.
Ouch. That's got to be a blow to the ego.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, talk about a social media nightmare, right?
So what's the takeaway here? Why does Jesus tell this story?
He's making the point that true honor comes from God, not from our own self-promotion. When we humbly take the lowest place, we acknowledge that it's God who ultimately exalts us. It's about surrendering our ego and letting him take the lead.
It's about putting others first, not ourselves.
Exactly.
There's something really freeing about that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Letting go of the need to constantly prove ourselves and instead focusing on serving others.
There really is. It takes the pressure off, allowing us to focus on what truly matters. Loving God and loving our neighbor.
And that's what brings true fulfillment, right?
It is.
Okay, now things take an interesting turn in verses 12-24. We have another banquet scene, but it's very different. This time, it's the parable of the great banquet.
Right.
It starts with Jesus advising his host to invite the poor and marginalized instead of just the wealthy and influential.
Yes. This is where we see Jesus challenging social norms. He's saying that true generosity isn't about expecting something in return. It's about extending kindness to those who can't repay you.
Those who society often overlooks.
Exactly. Those who are on the margins.
Then Jesus tells this parable about a man who throws a huge banquet and invites tons of people. But get this, they all start making excuses for why they can't come.
The excuses are unbelievable.
One has to check out his new land, another has to test his oxen, and another just got married. It's almost comical.
It is. But underneath the humor, there's a serious message.
What is it?
Their possessions, their work, their personal lives, all these things take precedence over accepting this incredible invitation. They're so preoccupied with their own affairs that they miss out on an amazing opportunity.
And the host, understandably, is furious.
Oh, he is.
He tells his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.
It's a powerful image of God's radical inclusivity. Those who are considered unworthy, those on the fringes of society, are now welcomed with open arms into the banquet hall.
It's a beautiful picture of God's grace.
It is.
And it reminds us that his kingdom is a place where everyone belongs.
Regardless of their background or social standing.
What a contrast to that first banquet parable where everyone was jockeying for position. Here, it's not about who gets the best seat. It's about who gets included at all. And it makes us ask ourselves, are we extending God's invitation of love and grace to everyone? Or are we, like the first set of guests, too caught up in our own lives to notice those who are longing for acceptance and belonging?
That's a question worth pondering.
It really is, and we'll continue pondering that and more as we continue our deep dive into Luke 14.
I can't wait.
Me neither. See you in part 2.
Welcome back.
Okay, so we're picking back up in Luke 14, and man, we've got a lot more to dig into.
Yeah, we really do.
Before we hit those super challenging verses about like what it actually means to follow Jesus, let's circle back to those banquet parables.
Yeah.
Because, man, there's a lot there, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're packed with so many layers of meaning and challenge us to really rethink what God's kingdom is all about.
Okay, so let's revisit that first parable we talked about, the parable of the wedding feast.
Okay.
It's in verses 7 and 11, and it's the one where, like, Jesus is watching the guests kind of scramble for those best seats.
Oh, yeah. It's a classic example of human nature.
It is. It's like everyone wants to be seen. They want to have the best spot. It's like that whole social media popularity thing.
Totally. Always striving for recognition, wanting to be at the top.
Exactly. But then, Jesus uses this very real, relatable situation to teach a powerful lesson about humility.
Yeah.
He tells that story about, the guest who thinks he's all that, takes the highest place, only to be publicly embarrassed when someone more important shows up.
Ooh. Yeah, can you imagine?
Awkward.
Yeah, talk about a social media nightmare, right?
Total nightmare. So what's the point? Why does Jesus tell this parable?
I think he's reminding us that real honor, true honor, it comes from God, not from trying to promote ourselves or get ahead.
Okay, so it's not about chasing the spotlight.
Nope.
It's about serving others humbly.
Exactly. When we put our ego aside and we focus on lifting other people up, that's when God lifts us up.
There's something so freeing about that, letting go of that need to always prove yourself.
Oh, it's huge.
Just focusing on serving others.
It takes the pressure off.
It does.
And lets us focus on what actually matters. Loving God and loving our neighbor.
All right, so now let's look at the next parable, the parable of the great banquet, verses 12-24.
Okay.
This one is totally different.
Yeah, completely different angle.
Yeah, and it focuses on this huge invitation God offers us and how we respond to it.
It does. It does.
And I think what really strikes me about this parable is just how generous the host is,
Oh, he spares no expense. That feast, it's a picture of God's abundant grace and the incredible gift of salvation he offers us.
It's amazing. But then we see all these invited guests. They start making these ridiculous excuses as to why they can't come.
Oh, yeah. One has to check on his new land. Another's got to try out his oxen. Another just got married. Like, come on.
It's almost like they're going out of their way to avoid this amazing banquet.
I know, right?
Their excuses, I think they reveal something deeper.
They do.
I think it's about misplaced priorities, right?
Absolutely.
They're so busy with their own stuff, their possessions, their work, that they completely miss the true value of what they're being offered.
It's like they're saying, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I've got more important things to do.
Exactly. And, the host's reaction, it makes sense. He's angry, right? He's like, seriously, you're rejecting my generosity.
It is a bit of a slap in the face, isn't it?
It is. So he tells his servant, go out to the streets, find anyone, bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame,
Wow. Yeah, it's this incredible picture of radical inclusion.
It is.
Those who are seen as unworthy by society, those pushed to the margins, they're welcomed with open arms into the banquet hall.
It really challenges our ideas of who's worthy of God's love.
It does.
Because his kingdom, it's a place for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Regardless of where we come from or what our past looks like.
What a contrast to that first parable, right?
It is.
Where everyone's fighting for the best seat. Here, it's just about who gets in at all. And it makes us ask ourselves, are we sharing God's love and grace with everyone? Or are we like those first guests, too caught up in our own lives to even notice the people around us who are longing for that acceptance and belonging?
A good question.
All right, so we've talked about Sabbath healing. We've gone through these banquet parables. Now things get really intense, okay? Verses 25-33. the whole tone shifts.
It does.
Jesus starts talking about the cost of discipleship, and he doesn't hold back at all.
No, he doesn't.
He uses some strong language,
Yeah.
like really emphasizes the radical commitment it takes to truly follow him.
Yeah.
He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple.
Wow. That word hate, it's so harsh.
Yeah, it's definitely intense language.
But we got to understand it in the right context.
Absolutely.
It's not talking about literally hating our families.
No.
It's hyperbole, right?
Yeah.
He's emphasizing this radical shift in allegiance it takes to follow him.
He is.
So it's about loving Jesus more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Even our own families.
It means putting him at the very center of our lives, recognizing that our ultimate identity and purpose, it comes from him.
Okay, and then there's that phrase, bear his cross,
Yeah, that's heavy.
That's a tough one.
Especially when we think about what the cross meant back then, in Roman times.
Yeah, it's a symbol of suffering and shame and death.
It is.
And Jesus, knowing what's coming, he's heading towards his own crucifixion, he uses this image to prepare his followers.
He's letting them know that following him is not going to be a walk in the park.
Yeah, it's going to involve sacrifice and hardship and possibly even persecution.
But it's important to understand that he's not calling us to just suffer for no reason.
Right.
Or to become martyrs.
Yeah.
He's just acknowledging the reality that when we live a life that goes against the values of the world, it's going to bring challenges. So how do we balance this idea of radical discipleship, with that message of love and grace we saw in those banquet parables?
That's a great question.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one, and it's one we're going to keep exploring as we continue looking at Luke 14.
All right, so stay tuned because we are about to tackle the final part of this passage, and man, it's a good one. Welcome back. All right, we are wrapping up our deep dive into Luke 14, and wow, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah, we really have. We've journeyed through those Sabbath healings, we've unpacked those banquet parables, and wrestled with that intense call to discipleship,
Right. It's a lot to process.
It is.
But now we're at the final verses of this passage, Luke 14.3435, and Jesus kind of throws us a curveball, I think.
He does.
He brings up this image of salt.
Yeah.
It seems kind of random after all that talk about banquets and crosses, right?
It does seem like a sudden shift, but it's actually a really clever connection.
So tell me, what's the deal with salt? What's Jesus getting at here?
Well, he starts off by saying it's something we all know, right? Salt is good. I mean, it's essential. It enhances flavor. It preserves food.
Right, makes these taste better.
Exactly. But then he adds this unexpected twist, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?
Wait, salt can lose its saltiness?
Well, not literally, right? But that's the whole point Jesus is making.
I see.
It's this metaphor.
Okay.
He's saying, imagine if salt, which is inherently salty, if it somehow lost its defining characteristic.
Then it would be useless.
Exactly. It wouldn't serve its purpose anymore.
Okay, so he's using this image of salt to talk about us, about discipleship.
Exactly. He's challenging his followers, asking, are you really living in a way that reflects who you are as my disciples? Are you actually making a difference in the world? Or have you lost your saltiness?
Your distinctiveness.
Yeah, that unique quality of being a follower of Christ.
It's like if we just blend in with the world, if we compromise our values and lose that saltiness that sets us apart, we become ineffective.
Yeah, we lose our impact.
We're like that salt that's lost its flavor. Right?
Yeah, we're good for nothing, just like Jesus says.
So how do we guard against that? How do we make sure we don't lose our saltiness?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing those subtle ways we might be blending in,
Okay.
Have we become complacent, comfortable? Are we afraid to stand out, challenge the status quo?
Maybe we're more worried about fitting in than actually living out our faith, right?
It's possible.
I think that's a real struggle for a lot of people.
It is, and maybe we've even allowed those worldly values to kind of seep into our lives without realizing it,
Yeah, compromising our convictions little by little.
Exactly. Or maybe we've just lost our passion, our zeal for sharing the good news.
That fire that we once had.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jesus' words here, they're a challenge, aren't they?
They are.
They force us to take a good hard look at ourselves and ask, are we being that salt of the earth? Are we letting our light shine?
Tough questions.
They are.
But important ones.
Yeah, absolutely essential for anyone who wants to live a life that matters,
So, practically speaking,
Yeah.
what can we do to regain our saltiness if we've lost it?
Well, I think it's about surrendering to Jesus every day, letting him shape our thoughts, our words, our actions.
It's like a daily renewal,
It is. It's about actively looking for ways to serve others.
being that light in the darkness.
Exactly. And it's about speaking the truth, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular.
Living with integrity.
Yes, reflecting Christ's character in everything we do.
It's about being different, standing out, making a difference.
Absolutely. Living a life that points others to Jesus.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Luke 14,
Mm.
I think we need to remember this powerful image of the salt and what happens when it loses its savor.
The good reminder.
Let's ask ourselves honestly, are we being that salt of the earth? Are we making a difference in the world for Christ?
And if not, it's never too late to turn back to him,
Yeah.
to ask for his grace, to renew our passion, to sharpen our edges.
To empower us to live lives that are truly salty,
Flavorful and transformative.
lives that bring glory to God and point others to the hope and healing that only He can offer.
That's what it's all about.
This has been an amazing journey through Luke 14, and I want to thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into God's Word, but until then, keep diving.